I am Elena Vaughn, founder and CEO of Vaughn Innovations. At 36, I stand at the helm of one of the most cutting-edge technology firms specializing in artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. What began as a vision, a single idea fueled by relentless ambition, has grown into a company that shapes the future of digital security. 12 years ago, I built Vaughn Innovations from the ground up. It wasn't easy. The long nights, the sacrifices, the uphill battles against industry giants, all of it was worth it. Today, we lead in AI-driven security solutions, trusted by Fortune 500 companies and government agencies alike. Our breakthroughs have redefined how businesses protect their data, detect threats, and adapt to an increasingly unpredictable cyber landscape. Success, however, is never without its challenges. In the world of technology, power shifts quickly, and loyalty is often a fleeting concept. The biggest threats don't always come from the outside. Sometimes, they're much closer than you think. The meeting wasn't on my schedule. I stared at the notification that had just popped up on my phone. Emergency board meeting. Attendance required. No prior notice. No agenda. That alone was enough to put me on edge. I had run Vaughn Innovations for over a decade, and in that time, I had never been blindsided like this. Board meetings followed protocol, scheduled well in advance, agendas circulated, discussions prepared. This was a power move. A calculated ambush. Straightening my suit, I stepped out of my office and made my way to the boardroom. The floor-to-ceiling glass walls reflected my sharp posture as I walked, but inside, my mind was racing. Who called this meeting? Why wasn't I informed? As I reached the heavy mahogany doors of the executive conference room, I took a steadying breath. I pushed them open. Inside, the entire board of directors was already seated, their expressions carefully neutral. Too neutral. And at the far end of the long table, leaning back in my chair, was Leo. My younger brother. His expression was unreadable, but I knew that look. He had been waiting for this moment. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a meeting. It was a coup. I had barely taken my seat when Richard Montgomery, the chairman of the board, cleared his throat and leaned forward. "Elena," he began, his tone carefully measured, "we appreciate everything you've done for Vaughn Innovations. Your leadership has brought this company to where it is today." I narrowed my eyes. Compliments before a blow. I knew where this was going. But after much deliberation, he continued, "The board has come to the decision that a change in leadership is necessary. Effective immediately, you are being relieved of your position as CEO." Silence. I barely blinked. I didn't react, not yet. Around the table, some board members refused to meet my gaze, while others sat with an almost rehearsed neutrality. They had already made their choice. And then, from across the table, Leo spoke. "Vaughn Innovations needs a leader who understands the future," he said smoothly, his voice carrying an edge of triumph. "The board has voted, and I will be taking over as CEO, effective today." I turned to face him. My younger brother. The boy I had once protected. The man I had given a place in my company. And now? The one who had orchestrated my downfall. For the first time since I walked into the room, I allowed myself a small smile. Not of amusement, of calculation. Leo thought he had won. He had no idea what was coming next. I didn't react to the announcement, not the way they expected me to. No shock. No outrage. No desperate pleas for reconsideration. Instead, I exhaled slowly, as if I had been expecting this all along. Calmly, I reached for my leather-bound portfolio, flipping it open with deliberate precision. The soft rustle of paper filled the silent room as I turned to a specific page, one I had memorized long ago. Then I spoke. Even. Controlled. Sharp as a blade. "Before we proceed any further," I said, my voice cutting through the tension, "I'd like to direct the board's attention to Clause 212 of Vaughn Innovations' corporate charter." A flicker of uncertainty passed across Leo's face. He masked it quickly, but I saw it. The clause outlines the qualifications required for any individual assuming the role of CEO. I continued, my gaze sweeping across the board members, making sure they felt the weight of my words. It explicitly states that the successor must have a minimum of 4 years of senior management experience in artificial intelligence. I paused, then turned my attention directly to Leo. "How long have you been the company's chief strategy officer?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. His jaw tightened. 1.5 years, he admitted. "Ah," I nodded. A slow, knowing smile tugged at my lips. I turned to Richard Montgomery, the chairman, whose composed expression was starting to crack. "Then I assume the board has a legally binding plan to override this clause?" Silence. Leo's fingers curled into fists at his sides. He hadn't seen this coming. He thought he had outmaneuvered me. But he had made a fatal mistake. He underestimated me. Checkmate. A charged silence settled over the room. No one moved. No one spoke. Across the table, I saw the uncertainty creeping into the board members' faces. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others exchanged uneasy glances. They knew. Richard Montgomery, the chairman, cleared his throat. Elena, he started, his voice more cautious now. This clause can surely be amended. Only with a 90% shareholder vote. I interrupted smoothly, tapping the page with a manicured fingernail. And as the majority shareholder, I have no intention of voting in favor of any such amendment. I leaned back in my chair, letting my words settle. Leo's smug confidence cracked. His lips parted, but no words came. He glanced at Montgomery, then at the other board members, searching for support for a way out. There wasn't one. This is a technicality. Leo finally snapped, his voice laced with frustration. We can call for a vote. Go ahead, I said smoothly. Let's put it to a vote, shall we? Let's see just how many of our shareholders are willing to put an inexperienced, underqualified executive in charge of a $50 billion company, one who just attempted a backdoor coup. His face paled. Montgomery shifted in his seat. Leo, he said quietly, we don't have the votes. Leo's knuckles turned white against the table. I didn't bother to hide my smirk. Game over. Leo stood frozen, his knuckles still pressed against the polished conference table. For the first time since I walked into this room, he had nothing to say. The silence was deafening. Across the table, I watched as expressions shifted. Some board members looked visibly uncomfortable, others avoided my gaze entirely. They had backed the wrong horse, and they knew it. The coup had collapsed before it could even begin. Richard Montgomery exhaled, rubbing his temple. Given this oversight, I suppose there's nothing more to discuss, he muttered, already trying to distance himself from Leo's failed power play. Leo's jaw clenched. His eyes met mine, dark with something simmering beneath the surface. Rage, humiliation, calculation. I didn't trust that look. This was a loss for him, yes. But I knew my brother. Leo wasn't the type to accept defeat. He hadn't gone through the trouble of orchestrating this behind my back just to walk away quietly. This wasn't over. I straightened, collecting my portfolio with practiced ease, my movements unhurried, deliberate. Let them think I had already won. Let them believe this battle was settled. Because if I knew Leo, and I did, he was already planning his next move. The family dinner. The moment I stepped through the front door, I felt it. The tension. Thick. Unspoken. Hanging in the air like an approaching storm. The Vaughn family home hadn't changed in years, a sprawling craftsman-style estate nestled in one of Seattle's oldest neighborhoods. The warmth of polished oak floors, the soft glow of pendant lights, the faint scent of rosemary and garlic from the kitchen, all of it was familiar. But tonight there was something else. A weight. A quiet, suffocating pressure. I walked into the dining room, where my parents were already seated, their expressions unreadable. Across from them, Leo leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a carefully measured smirk tugging at his lips. So this was it. A carefully staged intervention. My mother, Olivia Vaughn, was the first to speak. Elena, she said, her voice too smooth, too deliberate. We need to talk. I exhaled slowly, pulled out a chair, and took my seat. I already knew where this conversation was going. And I was ready for it. The blame game. I barely had time to pick up my glass of wine before my father spoke. Elena, he began, his voice edged with restraint. I think it's time we had an honest conversation about how you run things. I set the glass down, my fingers tightening slightly around the stem. Here it comes. My mother sighed, folding her hands neatly on the table. We understand how much Vaughn Innovations means to you, she said, her tone soft, almost rehearsed. But you can't do everything alone. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Is that what this is about? You think I don't delegate? That's exactly it. My father cut in. His gaze, usually steady and measured, carried an unusual weight tonight. You never trusted Leo to take on real responsibility. Every time he tried, you dismissed him. I blinked. Dismissed him? Across the table, Leo leaned forward, his expression perfectly composed, as if he were the reasonable one in the room. They're right, he said smoothly. You've always treated me like an outsider in the company, Elena. Like I didn't belong. I turned to him, my patience hanging by a thread. You didn't belong? I made you Chief Strategy Officer with barely 2 years of experience. You were handed a leadership role most people would spend a decade working for. Leo scoffed. And yet you still refuse to let me make real decisions. I let out a slow breath, turning back to my parents. So let me get this straight, you're saying that I'm the problem here? Not the fact that your son just attempted a hostile takeover of the company I built? Mother flinched at the word. It wasn't a hostile takeover, Elena. The board voted. I gave her a sharp look. Because he manipulated them. Father exhaled sharply. Elena, listen to yourself. You're acting like this is some grand betrayal, when really, this is about the future of Vaughn Innovations. Maybe it's time you step back and let someone else take the lead. The words hit harder than I expected. I studied their faces, the people who raised me, who watched me pour my life into that company. And yet, when it came down to it, they had chosen Leo. Not because he was more capable. Not because he deserved it. But because they wanted to believe in him more than they ever had in me. I took a slow sip of my wine before setting the glass down with deliberate care. So that's what this dinner is about, I said quietly. You didn't invite me here to talk. You invited me here to tell me to step aside. No one answered. But they didn't have to. Their silence said it all. Leo sighed, shaking his head as if he were the reasonable one in the room. This isn't about sides, Elena, he said, his voice measured, careful. It's about what's best for Vaughn Innovations. I arched a brow. Here we go. You refuse to take risks, he continued. You've built something incredible, I won't deny that. But you're holding the company back. We could be expanding faster, scaling at a global level, making bolder moves in AI development, but instead, you micromanage everything to death. I scoffed. Micromanaging? Or making sure we don't walk off a cliff because someone is too eager to jump? Leo's jaw tightened, but he pushed forward. You've rejected every major acquisition deal in the last 5 years. You refused to take us public. And don't even get me started on the AI expansion plans I proposed. The ones that would have required us to sacrifice security protocols and rush incomplete software to market? I cut in sharply. Leo rolled his eyes. You act like every risk is a disaster waiting to happen. Because some risks are disasters waiting to happen. I shot back. We don't cut corners in this industry, Leo. We're dealing with cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, critical infrastructure. One misstep, one unchecked vulnerability, and we don't just lose money, we compromise people's data, government's data. The consequences are real. He exhaled, exasperated. And that's exactly what I mean. You're so focused on what could go wrong that you never see the bigger picture. I leaned forward, my voice low and sharp. No, Leo. I see the bigger picture better than anyone. That's why I built this company, and that's why it's still standing. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, Leo sat back, crossing his arms. That's your problem, Elena. You think just because you built it, no one else is capable of leading it. I stared at him, expression unreadable. I wasn't going to argue with him anymore. Because he had already proven me right. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to keep my voice steady. Leo, this isn't about my leadership style or my refusal to take risks. This is about you. His smirk faltered just slightly. I pressed on. You didn't propose a strategy. You didn't pitch your vision to me, to the board, to the shareholders. You went behind my back. You orchestrated a coup. Leo rolled his eyes, but I saw the tension in his posture. Oh, come on, Elena. Don't be dramatic. The board made a decision. They made a decision because you manipulated them. I cut in sharply. You went to them in secret. You convinced them I was unfit to lead. You staged a backroom vote without informing the CEO. That isn't ambition, Leo. That's betrayal. My mother gasped softly. My father's brow furrowed, as if he hadn't considered it in those terms before. Leo scoffed, shifting in his chair. That's business, Elena. You act like I stabbed you in the back. I held his gaze unwavering. You did. The room went silent. For a moment, the weight of it finally settled between us. Leo could dress it up however he wanted. He could call it strategy, progress, the future of Vaughn Innovations, but in the end, he had tried to take everything I built and claim it for himself. I studied his face, searching for some flicker of remorse. I found none. And that told me everything I needed to know. The ultimatum. My father's voice was steady, but there was an unmistakable finality in his words. Elena, he said, his gaze heavy with expectation. This has gone far enough. I kept my expression neutral, but inside I braced myself. I knew what was coming. My mother reached across the table, her fingers tightening around the stem of her wine glass. You need to find a way to work together, she urged, her tone softer but no less insistent. Leo isn't your enemy, he's your brother. And this company, this family, won't survive if you refuse to compromise. I didn't answer. That silence gave my father the push he needed. He set his fork down carefully, folding his hands together, and delivered the final blow. You have two choices, he said, voice low and firm. Either you share control of Vaughn Innovations with Leo, or you lose this family. The words landed like a stone in my chest. I glanced at my mother, waiting for her to argue, to soften the demand, but she didn't. Her silence spoke volumes. Leo, of course, looked pleased. He sat back, arms crossed, like he had just won another round. Like this was always the inevitable conclusion. I should have been furious. Maybe a part of me was. But more than that, I was disappointed. I let out a slow breath, setting my napkin on the table with deliberate care. Then, finally, I looked my father in the eye. You're asking me to hand over the company I built to someone who just tried to steal it? A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. He didn't deny it. I exhaled, nodding to myself. They had already made their choice. I pushed my chair back and stood. Then I guess you have your answer. My mother's face fell. Elena. No. I cut in, my voice quiet but firm. I won't reward betrayal. Not even from family. Leo smirked, but there was something else in his eyes now, a flicker of uncertainty. He hadn't expected me to walk away so easily. I turned toward the door, my heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Because at that moment, I knew I had lost them. I had expected retaliation. What I hadn't expected was how quickly Leo made his next move. It started with a dip in Vaughn Innovations' stock price, small at first, barely noticeable. But then, within days, it began to plunge, faster than normal market fluctuations could explain. At first, I assumed it was external pressure, industry shifts, routine investor caution. But then came the whispers, rumors spreading through the company, the media, and the investor circles. Vaughn Innovations is struggling. The company's leadership is in turmoil. Investors are losing confidence in Elena Vaughn's ability to steer the ship. All lies. Carefully constructed, strategic deception designed to destabilize me. I had seen these tactics before, but never from someone on the inside. A discreet call to Richard Montgomery, the board chairman, confirmed my suspicions. Leo had been meeting with key shareholders, feeding them selective information, exaggerating risks, planting doubt. He was playing the long game, and it was working. Stockholders who had once been firm in their loyalty were now hesitant. The board, still reeling from the failed coup, was starting to question whether I was truly capable of holding the company together. Leo hadn't just lost the battle in the boardroom. He had started a war. The headlines hit like a tidal wave. Vaughn Innovations in crisis. Stock plummets amid leadership struggles. Is Elena Vaughn losing control? Investors expressed doubts. Internal conflict at Vaughn Innovations. CEO under pressure. Every major financial outlet ran with the story. I scrolled through the articles, my grip tightening around my phone. Anonymous sources. Speculative analysis. Misinterpreted data. All designed to create one narrative, that Vaughn Innovations was spiraling, and that I was the reason why. Leo had been smart. He hadn't just fed doubts to shareholders, he had weaponized the media. The calls from investors started flooding in. Some were blunt, demanding answers. Others were more cautious, skirting around the real question but all circling back to the same underlying concern. Can you still lead this company? I kept my responses calm, measured, in control. Assuring them that Vaughn Innovations was stable, that the rumors were exaggerated, that we were still on track. But I knew words alone wouldn't be enough. Perception was power. And right now, Leo had shifted it against me. This wasn't just about my leadership anymore. It was about survival. A shadow deal. Crisis management had become my new full-time job. Every hour was spent containing the damage, reassuring investors, stabilizing the market's confidence in Vaughn Innovations. But while I was putting out fires, Leo was starting another one. It was Richard Montgomery who tipped me off. Leo's been meeting with Daniel Mercer, he said in a hushed voice over the phone. 3 times in the past 2 weeks. Always off the record, always away from company premises. I stiffened. Daniel Mercer, CEO of Titan Dynamics. A shark in the industry, Mercer wasn't known for innovation. He was known for hostile takeovers, stripping companies for their technology, and leaving the remains behind. If Leo was meeting with him, it meant one thing. He wasn't just trying to take Vaughn Innovations from me. He was trying to sell it. The pieces clicked together in my mind, the stock manipulation, the media frenzy, the investor doubts. Leo wasn't just playing a long game to push me out. He was deliberately destabilizing the company. Making Vaughn Innovations look vulnerable. Making it a perfect acquisition target. I clenched my jaw. He wasn't trying to lead the company. He was trying to trade it. I had learned long ago that trust was a liability in business, especially when dealing with family. Leo's secret meetings with Titan Dynamics weren't just a red flag, they were a flashing neon sign spelling out corporate betrayal. But I wasn't about to make accusations without proof. I picked up my phone and dialed Richard Hayes, Vaughn Innovations' chief legal counsel. He answered on the second ring. Richard, I said, my voice sharp and controlled. I need you to dig into Leo's financial activity. I want every transaction, every private meeting, every off-the-books deal he's been making for the past 6 months. There was a pause. Then, a measured response. I assume this has to do with Titan Dynamics. He's making a move, I confirmed. I need to know how deep it goes. Richard exhaled. If he's been covering his tracks, this won't be easy. Then make it thorough, I said. Check his travel expenses, private meetings, stock movements, even personal accounts if necessary. If there's a paper trail, I want it. Another pause then. Understood. I ended the call and leaned back in my chair, staring out at the city skyline through my office window. Leo thought he was being careful. But every deal leaves a trace. And I was about to find his. It didn't take long for Richard to find what I was looking for. 2 days after my request, he walked into my office, a thick folder in hand, his expression unreadable. He closed the door behind him before speaking. You were right, he said, setting the folder on my desk. Leo's been funneling company funds into private meetings and negotiations with Titan Dynamics. He's treating corporate accounts like his personal war chest. I opened the folder, scanning the documents. Expense reports. Private jet charters. Luxury hotel stays. Lavish business dinners. Every meeting, every transaction tied back to one name, Daniel Mercer. Richard continued, his voice calm but edged with something cold. He's been positioning Vaughn Innovations as a distressed asset, exaggerating our financial instability, delaying key reports, and feeding doubts to investors. All to justify a merger with Titan Dynamics. I clenched my jaw. So that was his play. Leo wasn't trying to run Vaughn Innovations. He was trying to sell it. A hostile takeover disguised as a strategic partnership. And he was using my own company's money to do it. I let out a slow breath, keeping my voice steady. Does he know we have this? Richard shook his head. Not yet. But once he does, he'll try to cover his tracks. I closed the folder, tapping my fingers lightly against the cover. Then we don't give him the chance. Leo had declared war. Now, it was my turn to strike. I didn't give Leo time to cover his tracks. Within hours of receiving Richard's report, I had summoned the entire board for an emergency meeting. No prior warning, no time for backroom deals, just a single directive. Attendance required. No exceptions. By the time I stepped into the boardroom, every seat was filled. The tension was palpable. Leo sat near the far end of the table, his expression a carefully constructed mask of irritation and forced confidence. But I could see it, the flicker of unease in his eyes. He knew something was wrong. I placed the thick folder on the table and flipped it open. Before we begin, I said, my voice steady but razor sharp, I want to make something very clear. What I'm about to show you isn't speculation. It isn't rumor. It's fact. And it directly affects the future of Vaughn Innovations. I slid a copy of the financial reports, expense logs, and private transaction records across the table. Leo Vaughn, I continued, has been misappropriating company funds, using corporate accounts to finance secret meetings, luxury trips, and private negotiations. Murmurs erupted around the table. Some board members turned to Leo. Others stared at the documents, flipping through them in disbelief. But I wasn't finished. I clicked the remote in my hand, and the large screen behind me flickered to life. Projected for the entire room to see was a sequence of damning records: Leo's meetings with Titan Dynamics, his communications with their legal team, and the strategic financial delays that created the illusion of company instability. This wasn't an accident, I said, stepping forward. It wasn't mismanagement. It was deliberate. I turned to Leo, locking eyes with him. You engineered instability. You manipulated our shareholders. You made Vaughn Innovations look weak, so that Titan Dynamics could justify a hostile merger. The room fell into a stunned silence. Leo finally spoke, his voice sharp but laced with the first hints of desperation. This is ridiculous. This is just... Do you deny it? I cut in. His jaw clenched. He glanced at Montgomery, at the other board members, looking for support, looking for an escape. But the weight of evidence was too much. For the first time since this battle began, Leo looked like he knew he was losing. The room buzzed with low murmurs and exchanged glances. Papers shuffled, a few chairs creaked as board members shifted uncomfortably. The cracks in Leo's support were beginning to show. I watched as some of them, the ones who had thrown their weight behind him before, now avoided his gaze, flipping through the documents with tight expressions. The numbers didn't lie. The trail of deceit was undeniable. But not everyone was convinced. This isn't as clear-cut as you're making it out to be, Elena, Jonathan Reeves, one of the longer-serving board members, spoke hesitantly. A merger isn't inherently a bad thing. If Titan Dynamics can bring in new capital. I cut him off, my voice cold. Titan Dynamics doesn't invest in companies, Jonathan. They dismantle them. They acquire, they strip assets, they absorb technology, and they leave the rest behind. I gestured toward the screen. And Leo was ready to sell this company to them without informing any of you. Across the table, Leo straightened, forcing confidence into his posture. That's not what happened, he argued, voice sharp. I was exploring opportunities. Looking for ways to strengthen Vaughn Innovations, to take it beyond the limits Elena insists on keeping. A few board members nodded slightly, the one still in his corner. But others weren't buying it. Montgomery, the chairman, finally spoke, his voice heavy with something like disappointment. This wasn't your decision to make, Leo. Leo's jaw tightened. The room was slipping away from him, and he knew it. But he wasn't out of moves yet. This company is bigger than one person. He shot back, his tone sharper now, more desperate. Bigger than me. Bigger than Elena. He turned to the board, his voice shifting, rallying. We have to think about the future, not just who's in charge. Some members hesitated, caught between loyalty and uncertainty. I stayed silent, letting them sit with their own discomfort. Let them see what he was doing, how he was trying to twist the narrative. Leo was good at playing the game. But I was better at winning it. The murmurs around the table hadn't even settled when Leo pushed back his chair and stood, his expression shifting from defensive to commanding. He wasn't retreating. He was doubling down. If Vaughn Innovations wants to survive, he declared, his voice strong, unwavering, we need to evolve. We need to think beyond tradition, beyond control, beyond the old ways of doing things. I folded my arms, watching him carefully. He was setting the stage. The facts are clear, he continued, sweeping a hand over the documents in front of him as if they were nothing but distractions. The stock is unstable. Investors are losing faith. The industry is moving faster than we are. His gaze locked onto the board, deliberate, persuasive. And that's why I am officially proposing a merger with Titan Dynamics. Silence. A heavy, weighted silence. I saw the immediate shift in the room. Some members stiffened, their hesitation now full-blown alarm. Others leaned forward, considering. Montgomery spoke first, his tone edged with disbelief. Leo, you can't be serious. Leo's jaw tightened, but he forced a calm smile, the perfect politician. This isn't about me. It's about the company. He turned to the board, his voice smooth, rehearsed. Titan Dynamics isn't the enemy. They are an opportunity. An opportunity for expansion, for stability, for access to the kind of global resources we've only dreamed of. I didn't flinch. I had expected this. Leo wasn't going to beg. He wasn't going to backtrack. He was going to spin this into his idea of a bold vision. The Vaughn name will still stand. He continued, calculated reassurance in every word. We will still operate independently, just with stronger backing, greater reach, and more security. He spread his arms, as if this was the obvious solution. This is how we save Vaughn Innovations. I waited a beat. Then another. Letting the room breathe in the weight of what he just said. Then I spoke, my voice cutting through the silence. No, Leo. I leaned forward. This is how you sell it. The tension in the air snapped like a live wire. I should have known Leo wouldn't stop at the boardroom. The invitation came through my mother. A family dinner. Just the four of us. The message was simple, almost normal, as if the past few weeks hadn't been a battlefield. Your father and I want to talk. Come to the house tonight. I knew better. This wasn't a dinner. It was a setup. Still I went. Not because I expected them to take my side, but because I needed to hear exactly how far Leo was willing to go. By the time I arrived, the table was already set. A perfectly curated scene of warmth and tradition, our mother's home-cooked dishes, soft lighting, a bottle of wine already open. Leo sat at one end, his suit jacket draped over his chair, sleeves casually rolled up as if this were just another meal. A performance. My father was already sipping his drink, his expression unreadable. My mother gave me a small smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. I took my seat. The moment my napkin touched my lap, Leo leaned forward, seizing control of the conversation. We don't have to keep fighting, Elena, he said smoothly. This doesn't have to be a war. I let out a slow breath, keeping my posture relaxed. Then stop trying to take what isn't yours. My mother flinched. My father sighed. Leo only smiled. I'm not taking anything, he said. I'm saving it. He glanced at our parents, his voice lowering just enough to sound like the rational one at the table. We all know the company is at a crossroads. The board sees it. The investors see it. The media sees it. He looked at me. The only person who refuses to see it is you. I didn't blink. Then my father spoke. Elena, he said, setting down his glass. Maybe it's time to consider what's best for Vaughn Innovations. There it was. I exhaled slowly, setting my fork down. This isn't about what's best for the company, I said, my voice even. It's about control. Leo doesn't want to lead Vaughn Innovations, he wants to trade it. Leo sighed as if I were exhausting. You're impossible. And you're a liar. I shot back, my patience razor thin. I turned to my parents. He's been bleeding the company dry to make it look like we're struggling. Manipulating investors. Creating instability. I shook my head. And now, after everything, you expect me to sit here and just, what? Hand him the company? My mother's voice was gentle, but firm. We expect you to do what's right for Vaughn Innovations. I let out a quiet laugh, shaking my head. They had already chosen their side. I could see it in their faces, the quiet conviction, the certainty in their voices. They had already made up their minds. My mother reached for my hand, her grip warm but insistent. Elena, this is an opportunity. You're too close to see it, but Leo is right. This merger could take Vaughn Innovations to a level you never imagined. I pulled my hand back, carefully, deliberately. I never imagined it because I built this company to stand on its own. My father exhaled, shaking his head. And what if that's the problem? He asked, his voice measured. Maybe you're so determined to protect it that you're holding it back. Titan Dynamics has resources, global infrastructure, the ability to scale in ways we can't. Why fight an opportunity to secure the company's future? I forced a calm breath. They weren't just considering the merger, they believed in it. Leo had done more than manipulate the board. He had sold the dream to our parents. Wrapped it in a package of growth, expansion, prosperity. And they had bought it. You think this is about progress? I said, scanning their faces. But you don't see what's really happening. I gestured toward Leo, who sat quietly, watching the conversation unfold like he had already won. He isn't securing Vaughn Innovations' future. He's handing it over. Leo let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. You're always so dramatic. I turned back to my parents. Do you know what Titan Dynamics does to the companies they acquire? I asked, my voice sharp. They strip them down. They absorb the assets, rebrand the technology, and gut the workforce. They don't merge, they consume. My mother hesitated. My father didn't. They're offering 10 times our current valuation, Elena. He leaned forward, voice firm. Do you understand what that means? For us? For our legacy? I stared at him, feeling the weight of what he had just said. It wasn't just about the company. It was about them. About security. About cashing out. Leo had given them a perfect excuse to walk away. For the first time that night, I felt something deeper than anger. I felt alone. I let their words settle. The weight of their conviction, their certainty that they were right. That Leo was right. Then, without a word, I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my phone. I could feel their eyes on me as I unlocked the screen, scrolled through my files, and tapped play. The soft crackle of audio filled the room. Leo's voice. Clear. Unmistakable. Confident. Titan Dynamics won't sign off until they see proof of access. Once I send them the AI framework, they'll know we're serious. They'll have no reason to back out. Silence. Then my father set his glass down a little too hard, his expression unreadable. My mother's lips parted slightly, confusion flickering across her face. Across the table, Leo's smirk vanished. I let the recording play a few seconds longer. Just enough for them to hear the truth in his own words. Then I stopped it. And waited. My father was the first to break the silence. His voice, now low and controlled. Leo. Leo didn't answer. My mother turned to him, her voice almost pleading. Tell me this isn't real. He forced a scoff, but I saw the panic creeping in. Oh, come on. You think a single recording proves anything? You think I'm the only one who? You gave them access to Vaughn Innovations' AI platform. My voice was steady. Cold. Our most valuable, proprietary technology. The foundation of everything this company has built. I leaned forward. You didn't just push for a merger. You handed them leverage. For the first time all evening, Leo had nothing to say. The weight of the revelation crashed over the room like a tidal wave. My mother's hand covered her mouth, her breath unsteady as she turned to Leo. Disbelief. Shock. A flicker of something close to betrayal. My father, ever composed, sat perfectly still, too still. But his expression had hardened, the lines on his face etched deeper in the dim light. Leo, he said, his voice low, unreadable. Tell me this isn't true. Leo finally spoke, but his tone was different now, not confident, not smug, just desperate. Dad, you're overreacting. This was just a negotiation tactic, a way to show Titan Dynamics we had something valuable. I didn't actually give them anything yet. Yet. The word hung in the air like poison. My mother shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. You risked everything. The entire company. For what? Leo scoffed, his frustration slipping through. For a future, Mom. For growth. For something bigger than. For yourself. I cut in. My voice was sharp, but I didn't raise it. I didn't have to. The truth had already shattered the illusion. My father exhaled, rubbing his temples. When he spoke again, his voice was colder than I had ever heard it. Do you even realize what you've done? Leo opened his mouth to argue. Then closed it. Because he knew. And now, so did they. I turned to Leo, locking eyes with him. I wanted him to feel this. To understand exactly what he had done. This isn't ambition, I said, my voice steady, cutting through the stunned silence. This is betrayal. Leo flinched. Just for a second. A small, involuntary reaction, one he quickly masked with forced defiance. But I saw it. I saw the moment he realized there was no talking his way out of this. My parents were still in shock, still processing the weight of what they had just heard. The gravity of his actions. But I wasn't shocked. I had seen this coming from the moment he sat in my chair and declared himself CEO. What he hadn't realized, what he never understood, was that power isn't just taken. It's earned. And tonight, he had lost everything. I could feel the weight of every word as it left my lips. I leaned forward, my gaze never leaving Leo's face, steady, deliberate. He needed to hear this. You didn't just betray me, Leo, I said, each word cutting through the tension like a blade. You betrayed this company. The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. I let the silence stretch, giving him time to absorb what he had done, what he had become. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. His expression shifted from defiance to something else, something I couldn't quite place. Regret? Fear? It didn't matter. I had given him every chance to do this the right way, to work with me, to build something that would last. But instead, he had chosen the easy path. The path of betrayal. You went behind my back. You tried to sell everything I built for a quick deal. I continued, my voice unwavering. You thought you could use our company's future as leverage to line your pockets. Leo's eyes flickered, the facade he had so carefully constructed finally cracking. But there was nothing left to hide now. He had crossed a line, one that couldn't be undone. The moment the weight of Leo's actions became clear, there was no turning back. I took the evidence Richard and I had gathered, every last transaction, every recorded meeting, every piece of proof that Leo had been scheming behind the company's back. It wasn't just financial mismanagement, it was corporate fraud. I sat at my desk, drafting the official report with meticulous care. Each line, each document, needed to be perfect. This wasn't just about saving Vaughn Innovations, it was about ensuring that justice was served. The Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, would receive everything. The altered financial reports, the transactions that funneled company funds into private meetings with Titan Dynamics, and the critical access Leo had given them to our AI platform, the very heart of our business. Next, I contacted the Technology Crime Investigation Agency. They would need to investigate Leo's direct involvement in the plot to undermine the company and sell its most valuable assets. I couldn't let this slide. Once the reports were filed, I leaned back in my chair, my fingers tapping the desk. This wasn't personal anymore. This was about protecting the future of everything I had built, and ensuring that Leo faced the consequences of his actions. I knew there would be backlash. I knew that the legal battle ahead would be grueling. But the truth had to be heard. And Leo was going to answer for what he had done. By the time the investigation was set in motion, the damage had already been done. The SEC had their hands full, and the Technology Crime Investigation Agency had begun their work, sifting through every angle of Leo's betrayal. What I hadn't expected, however, was how quickly Titan Dynamics would react. Within days of the report being filed, I received the call. Titan Dynamics is pulling out of the deal, effective immediately. The voice on the other end was calm, almost too calm. They're claiming that the ongoing investigation into your company has rendered the merger too risky to proceed. I leaned back in my chair, a wave of relief washing over me. It was swift, it was final. They knew exactly what they were dealing with now. But what struck me wasn't just their sudden withdrawal, it was the silence that followed. The merger had been positioned as the only way forward for Vaughn Innovations. Titan Dynamics had come to the table with promises of growth, of global expansion, of an undeniable future. And now, just like that, they were gone. Leo had thought he could manipulate the situation to his advantage, that he could sell off the company he had failed to lead. But in the end, it was his own recklessness that cost him everything. I exhaled slowly. The war wasn't over, not yet. But this victory, this moment, was mine. And now, I would rebuild. The fallout from Leo's actions grew more severe with each passing day. As the investigation unfolded, the full scope of his betrayal became clearer. The SEC had already begun its thorough examination of the misappropriated funds and the unauthorized access to proprietary technology. And now, the Technology Crime Investigation Agency had turned its attention to a far darker aspect: the leak of confidential company data to Titan Dynamics. I watched as the headlines began to shift, and the whispers within the industry became louder. Leo was no longer just a failed successor, he was now the subject of public scrutiny, with his every move under investigation. In private, Richard kept me updated. "They're looking into everything, Elena. Every meeting, every communication with Titan. They've already got security footage and digital logs. This could get worse for Leo." The walls were closing in. Leo, once so confident in his ability to manipulate those around him, was now scrambling to cover his tracks. His meetings with Titan, his private discussions with the legal team, his dealings with shareholders, everything was under the microscope. And it didn't take long for him to realize the severity of his situation. If the investigation confirmed the extent of the leaks, the penalties would be harsh. Industry bans, fines, legal consequences. It would strip him of his career in the tech world. I sat back in my office, watching the city lights flicker outside. For the first time in a long while, I felt a strange sense of finality. Leo had gambled, and now, he was facing the consequences. The final vote. It was time to end the chapter. The board had been quiet for weeks, torn between loyalty and the undeniable evidence of Leo's betrayal. But now, the investigation had exposed the full extent of his actions. The damage had been done, and there was no going back. The meeting was called in a matter of hours. No room for discussion. No room for negotiation. This was the end. As I walked into the conference room, I could already feel the weight of the decision hanging in the air. Leo was seated at the far end of the table, his eyes locked on the board members who had once been his allies. But today, there was no room for allies. The vote was already set. Richard Montgomery, the chairman, stood at the head of the table. His voice was firm, but there was an undeniable sadness in it. "The matter before us is clear. We have reviewed the evidence, the findings of the SEC, and the actions that have led us here. It's time to vote on Leo's status within Vaughn Innovations." Leo's expression was still defiant, but his grip on the edge of the table tightened, as if he were bracing for the inevitable. "We'll take the vote now," Richard said. "All in favor of terminating Leo Vaughn's position and removing him from the company." The moment dragged, but the votes were unanimous. "Aye." Leo's face paled, the last shred of confidence slipping away. I didn't look at him. There was nothing left to say. Motion passed. Richard's voice was final. "Leo Vaughn is hereby removed from Vaughn Innovations, effective immediately. All rights, privileges, and benefits are revoked." The room was still. For a long moment, there was only the sound of shuffling papers, the quiet weight of the decision sinking in. Leo stood up, his face red with frustration, his eyes darting to each of us. But this time, no one moved. No one spoke. He had lost. As he walked toward the door, his movements stiff and forced, I finally allowed myself to exhale. The battle was over. But the war? That had only just begun. As the door to the boardroom clicked shut behind Leo, the tension in the air didn't dissipate. It only thickened. I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of the decision settle in. The vote had been final. Leo had been removed from the company he had tried to destroy, but the real battle wasn't about business. It was about family. I turned to see my parents, sitting at the table, their faces a mixture of disbelief and sorrow. My mother's eyes were wet with unspoken words. My father's jaw was tight, his hands clenched. They had believed in Leo. They had stood by him, even when I had pointed out his wrongdoings, even when the evidence had piled up. And now, they had to face the truth. Their son wasn't the man they had hoped he was. "Elena." My mother's voice trembled, like she was struggling to find the right words. I met her gaze. I had always believed that the truth would eventually come to light, but I didn't expect it to feel like this. I didn't expect the sting of seeing my parents torn between their loyalty to me and their love for Leo. "He made his choices," I said, my voice calm but unwavering. "You saw the evidence. There's no other way to look at this." My father was quiet, but his disappointment cut deeper than words ever could. His eyes locked with mine, and for the first time in a long while, there was no anger in his gaze. Just an understanding that we couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. "You're right," he said finally, his voice hoarse. But that doesn't make it any easier, Elena. He's our son. I could see the conflict in his eyes. But I also saw the recognition that this wasn't just about family anymore. It was about what was right. He chose his path. I replied, my voice steady, but my heart heavy. And now, we all have to live with the consequences. My mother's tears fell, and for a moment, I wished I could take the pain away. But there was nothing to fix. Leo had crossed the line, and he had forced all of us to face the reality. I never wanted it to be like this, I whispered, more to myself than to them. But I couldn't change what had happened. And deep down, I knew that they understood that now. Leo left the tech industry in disgrace, his career in ruins. The legacy he had tried to build on manipulation and deceit had crumbled, taking with it his influence, his position, and any hope of redemption in the field he once coveted. The headlines told the story: Leo Vaughn, former executive at Vaughn Innovations, steps down amid scandal and fraud investigations. There were no more calls for interviews, no more meetings with potential investors. The door to the world he once thrived in had closed firmly behind him. As for me, Vaughn Innovations did not need a merger to grow. We had already proven that. In the months that followed, I poured every ounce of my energy into rebuilding the company. The AI platform launched successfully. New partnerships were forged with industry leaders who saw the value in what we had to offer. Investors who had once faltered returned, confident in the direction we were headed. Vaughn Innovations was stronger than ever, not because of a merger, but because of the vision and integrity that had built it in the first place. But not everything returned to normal. My parents, once my greatest supporters, now kept their distance. They still cared, I knew that. But the chasm between us had widened, and it was no longer just about the company, it was about family. They never fully accepted my decision. I hadn't expected them to. But it hurt, nonetheless. Then, one day, a small envelope arrived at my desk. I knew it wasn't a business matter, it wasn't even from the company. It was from my father. I opened it carefully. There was no letter, just a simple note, short, but heavy with meaning. Kan de juvum gwin tak kwa min. Hey cho chung tao doi jan. It was all he had said. I stood there, staring at the words, a lump forming in my throat. They had always believed that family came first. But in the end, it was my duty to protect what I had built, no matter the cost. I had made the right choice. But the price of that decision was still sinking in. I stood in my office, looking out over the city skyline, the lights twinkling like 1,000 promises made in the quiet of the night. The weight of everything that had happened, the betrayal, the loss, the sacrifices, hung heavily on my shoulders. But I was still standing. I had lost so much: family, trust, and the ease of a life I once thought would remain untouched. Yet there was something unshakable inside me, a voice that whispered through the silence. Family may break apart, but morality and justice will not. I nodded to myself, a silent acknowledgement of the path I had chosen. My phone buzzed on my desk, the sudden vibration pulling me from my thoughts. I glanced at the screen. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. You've won. I hope it was worth it. Leo. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I knew what he wanted. He wanted me to feel the weight of the victory. To question if it had all been worth it. But there was no question in my mind. I had done what was right. I had not only protected the company I built. I had protected myself. As I stood there, watching the city stretch out before me, I realized that the journey I had just endured had taught me something far more valuable than business strategy or corporate tactics. It was about integrity, resilience, and the cost of standing up for what is right. Life doesn't always unfold the way we expect. Family, career, ambition, they all intertwine, and sometimes, the very things we hold most dear are the ones that can hurt us the most. Trust can be broken in the blink of an eye, and loyalty can become a fragile thread. But through it all, the one thing I had learned was that no matter how difficult the choices may be, staying true to yourself and your principles will always guide you in the right direction. The path I took wasn't easy. I lost people I loved, faced unimaginable betrayal, and had to navigate a web of deceit. But in the end, it was clear, I didn't just protect a company. I protected my own sense of justice. And that's what made all the difference. At the end of the day, we have only our integrity. We can lose positions, titles, and even relationships, but if we stay true to our values, we remain unshaken. Sometimes, protecting what you've built means losing what you thought you couldn't live without. And though it might feel like the price is too high, in the end, it is the only thing that gives you peace. I had not only safeguarded Vaughn Innovations, but I had protected my own soul. That was the lesson I would carry forward: never compromise on what is right, even when the world tells you to.